China controls the minerals powering the global economy. Russia dominates the Arctic militarily. But the one territory positioned to challenge both of them belongs to Canada. It is massive, rich in critical resources, and sitting at the gateway to the Arctic. And almost nobody is paying attention to it. That place is Yukon, and it might be the most important overlooked territory on Earth. Right now, the global economy is being reshaped by two forces: the race for critical minerals and the opening of the Arctic. Yukon sits directly in the path of both. To understand why, start with a number that sounds impossible. Yukon covers 482,443 square kilometers. That is larger than Spain, bigger than California, nearly the size of France, and fewer than 50,000 people live there. That works out to roughly one person for every 10 square kilometers. Most of them live in a single city. Whitehorse, the capital, holds around 28,000 residents. The rest of the territory is scattered across tiny communities separated by vast wilderness. Drive through Yukon and you can go hours without seeing another vehicle, another building, or another person. For most of modern history, that isolation made Yukon irrelevant, remote, expensive, difficult to build in. Geography kept it out of global conversations. But geography is changing, and when geography changes, places that once seemed irrelevant suddenly become strategic. And this is the moment when Yukon's story stops being about the past and starts being about the future of the entire planet. Yukon's wealth has been known for more than a century. The Klondike Gold Rush in the late 19th century briefly turned the region into one of the most talked about places in North America. Tens of thousands of people flooded into the territory chasing gold, building towns and carving routes through terrain that had barely been mapped. The boom did not last. The easy gold ran out. The population collapsed, and Yukon returned to being remote and quiet. But the resources never disappeared. Modern mining continues to extract significant amounts of gold every year. More importantly, geologists have confirmed that Yukon holds much more than precious metals. Beneath its mountains are deposits of zinc, lead, copper, tungsten, and a growing list of minerals that are now considered critical to the global economy. These include lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite, and rare earth elements. These materials are essential for electric vehicle batteries, wind turbines, advanced electronics, and modern defense systems. The transition to renewable energy and electrified transportation is driving demand for these resources to unprecedented levels. To understand how unprecedented, consider this. The International Energy Agency estimates that demand for lithium alone will increase by more than 4,000% by 2040 compared to 2020 levels. Cobalt demand is projected to grow by 500% over its same period. Nickel, graphite, rare earth elements, all of them following similar trajectories. The world is not just transitioning away from fossil fuels, it is creating an entirely new industrial system that runs on a completely different set of raw materials. And whoever controls those materials controls the economy of the 21st century, in the same way that whoever controlled oil controlled the 20th century. That is not an exaggeration. That is the arithmetic of the energy transition playing out in real time. Right now, supply chains for many of these minerals are heavily concentrated. Processing capacity in particular is dominated by a small number of countries. China refines approximately 60% of the world's lithium, 80% of its cobalt, and nearly 90% of its rare earth elements. That concentration has become a strategic vulnerability for Western economies that is now being discussed at the highest levels of government in Washington, Brussels, Tokyo, and Ottawa. Governments are actively searching for new sources, especially in politically stable, democratic regions, where supply cannot be cut off by a single government decision on the other side of the world. Yukon fits that description better than almost anywhere else on Earth. Geological surveys have identified numerous critical mineral prospects across the territory. The Selwyn Basin alone is considered one of the largest undeveloped zinc and lead deposits on the planet. The Dawson Range holds significant copper and gold potential. The Whitehorse Copper Belt, one of the territory's oldest mining districts, is being re-examined with modern exploration techniques that are identifying deposits that earlier technology simply could not detect. Exploration spending has been rising steadily year over year, Junior mining companies, major producers, and government-backed exploration programs are all increasing their presence in the territory. On paper, the opportunity is enormous. But there is a problem, and it is the same problem that has haunted every attempt to develop Yukon's resources for the past 100 years. Getting anything into Yukon is expensive. Getting anything out is even more expensive. The territory has limited infrastructure. Roads exist, but many are long, isolated, and difficult to maintain through the brutal conditions of a northern winter. Some are gravel for much of their length. The Alaska Highway, the territory's main artery, was built as a military emergency measure during the Second World War, and still carries the character of something built under pressure rather than designed for long-term economic efficiency. Construction seasons are short due to extreme winters that can last 7 months or longer. Permafrost complicates foundations for roads, pipelines, and buildings in ways that Southern engineers consistently underestimate until they are standing in the middle of a project, watching the ground shift beneath them. Every kilometer of infrastructure costs more than it would in southern Canada, often by a factor of 3 or 4. There is no rail connection linking Yukon to the national freight network. The White Pass and Yukon Route Railway, which once connected Whitehorse to the port of Skagway in Alaska, ceased regular operations in 1982 and has never been restored for freight. Ocean access is limited, and what exists routes through American territory, creating a dependency that reduces Canada's control over its own supply chains. Resource wealth without a route to market is not wealth at all. It is stranded potential. For decades, these logistical challenges kept Yukon on the sidelines. The math simply did not work. The cost of extraction and transport often outweighed the value of what was being mined. But the calculation is changing, and the reason lies not just in rising mineral prices or improving technology. It lies in the Arctic Ocean to Yukon's north, and in something that is happening there, right now, that no government on Earth fully planned for. Arctic sea ice has been declining for decades. The data is not subtle. Since 1979, when satellite monitoring began, the Arctic has lost roughly 13% of its sea ice coverage per decade. The summer minimum, the point each year when ice coverage is at its lowest, has been setting new records with disturbing regularity. Shipping seasons are gradually getting longer. Routes that were once accessible only to specialized nuclear-powered icebreakers are becoming navigable for commercial vessels, with ice-strengthened holes during substantial parts of the year. By mid-century, some projections suggest the Arctic could be largely free of summer sea ice entirely. That is not a distant hypothetical. It is a timeline that shipping companies, military planners, and resource developers are already building strategies around. This matters because the Arctic offers something global trade always values above almost everything else: shorter distances. A ship traveling between Shanghai and Rotterdam via the Suez Canal covers approximately 21,000 kilometers and passes through some of the most congested and geopolitically sensitive choke points on Earth. The Strait of Malacca, the Suez Canal itself, the Strait of Gibraltar. Each one a potential bottleneck, a piracy risk, or a geopolitical flashpoint. An Arctic route between the same two ports covers approximately 15,000 kilometers. That is 6,000 fewer kilometers per voyage. At the fuel consumption rates of a modern container ship, that difference represents savings of hundreds of thousands of dollars per voyage. Multiply that across thousands of voyages per year, and you are talking about billions of dollars in annual savings for global shipping. If these routes become reliably navigable, they will not just attract shipping, they will restructure it. And Yukon sits near the Pacific gateway to Canada's Arctic waters. Ships entering from the Pacific pass through the Bering Strait and then move east along the Arctic coastline. For this to become a major trade corridor, those ships will need ports, refueling stations, repair facilities, navigation support, and emergency response infrastructure positioned along the route. Right now, very little of that exists along Canada's Arctic coast. Russia's northern coastline has ports and monitoring stations. Alaska has some infrastructure. Canada's Arctic coast between the Bering Strait and the eastern Arctic is largely empty. That gap is both a vulnerability and an opportunity of historic proportions. Every functioning trade route in history has generated enormous economic activity around its support infrastructure. The Silk Road created cities. The Atlantic trade routes built empires. The Suez Canal transformed global commerce. Ports create jobs. Logistics hubs attract investment. Supply chains form around them. Once traffic reaches a critical mass, growth becomes self-reinforcing in ways that are almost impossible to stop. Yukon is positioned to support that development in a way no other Canadian territory can match. Its geography places it between Alaska and Canada's western Arctic coastline. Infrastructure built in Yukon, roads, airstrips, logistics facilities, fuel depots, could connect the territory's inland mineral wealth to the emerging Arctic maritime routes simultaneously. You are not just building a mine, you are building a node in what could become the most important new trade corridor of the 21st century. This is not just about economics, it is about geopolitics. And the geopolitics of the Arctic are moving faster than most people realize. Russia has spent the past 2 decades systematically militarizing its Arctic coastline. New bases, new ports, new radar installations, new icebreakers, including nuclear-powered ones that have no equivalent anywhere in the Western world. Russia's northern sea route is being developed as a commercial shipping corridor with state investment and military protection simultaneously, a combination that no private company can replicate and no Western government has yet matched. China, despite having no Arctic coastline of its own, has declared itself a near-Arctic state and invested billions in Arctic research, shipping infrastructure, and resource development across Greenland, Iceland, Norway, and Canada itself. Beijing's vision of a polar Silk Road is not a slogan. It is a strategy backed by capital and executed with patience. Even the United States, through Alaska, has strategic interests in the region that are only now beginning to receive the infrastructure investment they require after decades of neglect. Land access between Alaska and the rest of North America runs through Canadian territory, including Yukon. Every American soldier, every piece of American military equipment, every supply chain supporting American Arctic operations that moves overland passes through Canada. That geographic reality adds a dimension to Yukon's strategic importance that goes well beyond mining or shipping. It makes the territory a critical link in North American defense as well as commerce. As the Arctic becomes more accessible and more contested, Canada's ability to project presence in the region depends partly on what it has built in Yukon. There is also a domestic dimension that shapes how all of this development can and must unfold. Much of Yukon is covered by modern land claim agreements negotiated between the Canadian government and First Nations over the past 3 decades. These are not the broken treaties of an earlier era. They are modern, legally binding agreements that give Indigenous governments real and meaningful authority over development decisions in their traditional territories. Projects require genuine consultation, negotiation, and partnership, not just notification. This can slow timelines, but it also creates fundamentally more durable outcomes than the resource extraction model of the past, which left communities devastated and landscapes scarred while the profits flowed elsewhere. When local communities are partners rather than opponents, projects face fewer legal challenges, attract more stable long-term investment, and generate economic benefits that stay in the territory rather than disappearing into distant corporate accounts. Several First Nations in Yukon are already active participants in resource development, infrastructure planning, and environmental monitoring. The model emerging here is genuinely different from the extractive colonialism that defined northern development for most of the 20th century. It is slower, it is more complex, but it may ultimately prove far more powerful. Today, despite all of these constraints, Yukon already generates billions of dollars in economic output each year from a population of fewer than 50,000 people. That figure was achieved without large-scale Arctic shipping, without major rail connections, and before critical mineral demand reached anywhere near its current levels. The potential ceiling is not just higher, it is in a completely different category. As demand for critical minerals continues to climb, as Arctic routes gradually open to reliable commercial navigation, and as geopolitical competition in the north intensifies with every passing year, Yukon's strategic value increases not linearly, but exponentially. The same geography that made it isolated for a century is becoming the precise source of its relevance to everyone who matters in the global economy right now. A territory sitting between Alaska and the Arctic Ocean, holding minerals the world desperately needs, positioned at the gateway to shipping routes that could reshape global trade, does not remain overlooked forever. History does not work that way. The question is not whether Yukon becomes important. The question is, who gets there first? Who builds the infrastructure? Who secures the supply chains? And who captures the economic and strategic value when the gateway fully opens? Canada has the territory. Canada has the resources. Canada has the legal frameworks and the democratic institutions that give it advantages over competitors who can move faster but cannot offer the same stability or rule of law. What Canada has not yet demonstrated is whether it can move with enough urgency to match the scale of the opportunity before it closes. Because China is not waiting, Russia is not waiting, and the Arctic is thawing on a schedule that answers to physics, not to political calendars. The gateway is opening. The minerals are there. The roots are forming. The only question that remains is whether Canada has the vision and the will to claim what geography has given it, or whether it will watch as others build the future of the global economy around a territory that was always Canada's to lead. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Can Canada unlock Yukon's potential in time? Or is this the opportunity that slips away while the world moves on without it?